Hey everybody, it's Lori, and I am here today with my November reading wrap up. So, in the month of November, I read 8 books. 2 of those were physical books, one was an ebook, and so the remaining 5 were audiobooks. Not a surprising thing for me in the year 2020 when I have listened to more audiobooks than I ever have before. But I'm going to go ahead and briefly talk about the nonfiction books, and then I will talk about my 2 fiction books because I read 6 nonfiction to 2 fiction this month. So first off, I'm going to start with the books that I read for nonfiction November, and I'm going to link up above in the cards and down below to my nonfiction November wrap up because I talk more in depth about these books in that one. But I'll just give you a very brief overview of those 4 books in this video as well. So the one I finished last was The Good Neighbor, The Life and Work of Fred Rogers by Maxwell King. This was a very interesting biography of Fred Rogers, who was, well known for Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood that was on for multiple decades and was a big thing in the lives of many children. And it was just a fascinating book. So if you've ever been interested in anything about Mr. Rogers, I highly recommend it. The audiobook is read by LeVar Burton of Reading Rainbow fame. So if you're my age, you will just really enjoy hearing about Mr. Rogers from Geordie LaForge. So, that's just kind of how it was for me. The book I read before that was How to Be an Antiracist by Ibram X. Kendi. I also listened to this in the audiobook form, and it was read by the author. This was yet another great book about the issues of race and racism and systemic racism in the United States and really throughout the world, but specifically focusing in on the United States. It's almost like part biography and part manifesto almost. So well done, and I just feel like the author put so much of his self into this work. So another really great one to read. I loved all my nonfiction November books this month. The book I finished before that was very, very, very dreadful, The Influenza Pandemic of 1918 by Albert Marin. And this was about the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918, and it also kind of relates to now. Now, this was written before our current pandemic started, but it does have quite a bit at the end about what's going to happen with the next pandemic, and it's pretty eerily spot on, to be honest. I know it's not a flu pandemic this time around, but man, did he have a lot of really interesting points, and just the history of the Spanish flu and everything that happened the last time we were going through a pandemic. I'm glad to be alive now instead of then, but I'd really prefer not to have pandemic in my lifetime, but you get what you get. And then the first book that I had read for nonfiction November, kind of working backwards, was Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men by Caroline Criado Perez. And this was probably my favorite book of the month. It's kind of hard to tell. It's hard to pick a favorite book, but it infuriated me, but just was so well researched, well documented. So many points were brought up in this book about how women are overlooked so often in our world and why we shouldn't be, essentially. So very, very good. I recommend this for any woman who wants to be infuriated, or any man who may feel like any man at all, but particularly if you feel like this seems overstated, that women aren't that ignored. I think that if you read or listened to this book, it would really make things very clear. And I can't remember if this one was narrated by the author or not, but I did listen to this one in an audiobook as well. The other 2 nonfiction-ish books that I finished were both for my Catholic 2020 challenge. My book about a saint was St. John Paul the Great, His Five Loves by Jason Everett. This was very interesting to read. There were a lot of things I didn't know about Pope John Paul II that were brought up in this book. And of course, there's also a lot of things that were not really well known about St. John Paul II that have come out recently that were less flattering. This definitely is a book by someone who has a great love for John Paul II. So it does not criticize John Paul II at all. But, some fascinating things. Like, he would have somebody read a book aloud to him while he read another book. I want that skill. Like, seriously, please. Somebody teach me how I can consume 2 books at once, because that's the main thing that I want out of this is to be able to read 2 books at once. But he was just a very smart man and had a lot of deep thoughts. So, not a perfect man. You probably couldn't tell from this particular biography, but, sometimes biographies are the way they are. So, Jason Everett loved Pope John Paul II, and you can tell in this book. But I thought it was pretty well done. And then the other one for my Catholic 2020 challenge was Poems Every Catholic Should Know by Joseph Pierce. So, there are some really good poems in here. I didn't love this. And I think the major issue is the way it is organized and just like, it's a weird assortment of poems every Catholic should know. I think maybe it's poems every English Catholic should know, perhaps. And Joseph Pierce does end with his own poetry, which is a little weird for me. So each author that has poems in here has a little bio about them. So those were interesting, but not something I really need in a poetry book. Now, all through, not the entire pandemic, but for quite a long time during this pandemic, we have been watching a mass by Redemptorist publications out of England with Father Dennis McBride. It was in the garden over the summer, and now it's kind of moving indoors as it gets colder there. But the reason I'm bringing him up is at the end of every mass, he reads a poem. And there have been such impactful poems that he has chosen that I would much rather have a book of poetry compiled by Father Dennis McBride than by Joseph Pierce, I'll be honest. I like Joseph Pierce. This isn't a slight to Joseph Pierce, but I think he was focusing too much on the history of the authors and not enough on the poetry. Because honestly, I think there are probably poems every Catholic should know that are from people of absolutely no faith. It was okay, but not my favorite thing ever. And then the last 2 books I have to talk about are actually 2 books in the same series. And that's Gilead and Lila. So these are both by Marilynne Robinson. I read Home in October, along with the Goodreads podcast. I was behind when they were doing it live, but anyway, I finished it up in October. And I really enjoyed it. But there are 3 other books in this series, and Home wasn't the first book, Gilead was. So I thought, you know what, I want to just finish out the series because the 4th book just came out recently, and that's called Jack. And I actually have it downloaded on my phone right now. I haven't started it yet because I need to finish up another audiobook that I'm working on. But so I will be finishing this series out sometime in December. But Gilead is the story of John Ames, who is an elderly preacher in a small town in Iowa. He has a friend who has a bunch of kids, but he is alone for a long time. So Gilead is a story of he does marry eventually, and he has a son, And so it's kind of a story of him writing to his son about life, and particularly about one of the sons of his friend. So that was the first book. I think now I keep getting confused whether Home or Lila is second and third. I think maybe Home was second, but maybe it was Lila. I don't know. It's hard for me to keep track. So Home was about the Boughton. The friend's name is Boughton, and his son Jack came home, and he's kind of the black sheep of the family. So Home was all about that. Lila is about John Ames's wife, Lila, and kind of her backstory. And it so far is my favorite of these books because Lila is such an interesting character. She has a very rough childhood and rough life until she comes into this town of Gilead. And then her life just kind of changes. But it's not like a flipping a switch sort of change. She has a lot of change to do. She has a lot of growth that needs to happen. And so it's interesting because you know from the first book, Gilead, and to some extent from Home, if Home came out before Lila, again, when you read books out of order, it can be complicated. You know a little bit about Lila as she is at that point, but she has a long story getting her to that point. So far, Lila has been my favorite. I did listen to both Gilead and Lila as audiobooks. The narrators were okay, maybe not the greatest ever, but it's just easy for me to get audiobooks right now. And then I will be finishing off by listening to Jack sometime this month. But Lila is my favorite so far of the Gilead series. But they were all very interesting to read. Not a lot happens, so if you're not into character development books, they might not be the right sort of book for you. But if you just enjoy stories where character is built, they were great. So those were the books that I read in the month of November. Thanks so much for watching. Feel free to subscribe if you'd like hearing about books and want to see more of my videos. Other than that, I will see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye.